Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Ascend's Women in Leadership Series featuring Leah Solivan. Leah is the founder of TaskRabbit and the general partner at Fuel Capital. I'm so excited for our conversation today. Leah is a badass and is not afraid to have the real conversations. Today, we're going to talk about her career journey, dig into how she commands respect when she's the only woman in the room, how she manages burnout, all the topics that keep us up at night, but we never talk about. And so, today this is going to be amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm Shivani. I am the CEO and founder of Ascend. We offer an online leadership program for women. What inspired me to start Ascend was I used to be in your shoes. As I was moving up to management, I learned how to lead and influence through trial and error. So I wanted to create the leadership program that I wish I had access to when I was making that transition. Our mission at Ascend is to elevate more women into leadership. That's a big way we're going to see the change that we need to see in today's workplaces. And we're doing it. We've had women from companies like Salesforce and Slack and Peloton and DoorDash come out of the program just feeling much more confident and being able to move up, including getting promoted. A big part of us being able to excel is learning directly from senior leaders who have been in our shoes, who have faced the challenges and have overcome them. That's why we host these fireside chats. And that's why I'm so honored and inspired to be able to talk to Leah, who has done it all and is more than gracious and willing to talk to us all about her experiences. Leah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So today, Leah and I are going to first chat for about 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to dig into any questions that you might have. So feel free in the Q&A icon that's in the bottom right of your screen to drop in any questions or upvote any questions that you want to hear from Leah. This is a special opportunity to dig in. And, we want this to be really valuable and fun for you. So if anything resonates, throw it in the chat. Reminder to change your chat settings to everyone instead of the default panelists and attendees so everyone can see it. Well, Leah, let's dig in. So you have a really fascinating and inspiring career journey. Can you share more about how you went from engineer to founding a category-defining company to now being an investor?
Sure. It was an accidental journey. I mean, I grew up in a very small rural town in central Massachusetts. The population was 4,000 people. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was in the Air Force for over 30 years. And I ended up going to women's college in Virginia, where I studied math and computer science. I fell in love with programming. And after college, I got a job at IBM as a software engineer. And I worked there for 8 years as a programmer. I worked on C++ programming, mostly a little bit of Java. I worked with, a team that was mostly men. They were mostly older, but I loved my job. I actually loved the team, learned a ton, have mentors that I still keep in touch with today, to this very day from IBM. And then it was 2008 when I had the idea for TaskRabbit. As a technologist, as an engineer, I saw these new technologies emerging. The iPhone had just come out 4 months earlier. No one was utilizing location-based awareness technology yet. And Facebook was just coming out of the college scene and becoming more mainstream. But I got really excited about how I could mash up these three things, social, location, and mobile, and create something that connected real people in the real world to get real things done. And progressively over the years, it became in real time, which is non-trivial. But I ended up, accidentally starting TaskRabbit just based on my love of technology, building the first version of the site, getting it launched, and it really snowballing from there. And so, over the course of almost a decade, I raised about $50 million in venture capital funding. I had never raised money before. I had never talked to investors before. So there's a huge learning curve there. And then in 2017, I ended up selling the company to IKEA, the global furniture retailer. And that was a really great acquisition for us. Ever since day one, IKEA furniture assembly was always one of the most popular tasks on TaskRabbit. And so I think it was completely foreshadowed over the course of a decade that that's, where we would end up partnering. And then around that same time, I got pulled in the direction of venture by a lot of different people and firms. And it's interesting because as a founder, I felt like TaskRabbit was so very much my identity. And it was really hard at the time to see how I could do anything after TaskRabbit. I just like poured my entire life into it for almost a decade. But now being on the other side of it, I'm 4 years, past the exit. I realized that time as an engineer, that time at TaskRabbit really prepared me to do what I'm doing today and what I really love, which is helping early stage founders and entrepreneurs get their businesses off the ground. My favorite time at TaskRabbit was when we were under 10 people just trying to figure things out. And so as I started meeting with investors and they were encouraging me to think about venture investing as a career, I just really fell in love with the idea of helping to build a firm. And so I met my partner, Chris Howard. I joined Fuel Capital as the second partner. We raised a third fund together, which we're investing out of now, which is a $75 million fund. And we get involved when companies are raising their first institutional seed round of funding. And so it's just been, sort of a dream come true to come first full circle and get to help engineers and entrepreneurs build out their businesses.
I love that. I've definitely used TaskRabbit multiple times for the IKEA furniture building. So probably contributed to that. Yeah, it's so convenient. And so a huge fan of that. And, one thing I particularly love about your story, I mean, there's so many parts, is the fact that, you're like, I thought TaskRabbit would be my identity. And then you reflect on it and you're like, this is actually just one stepping stone to where I am today. And I think that's such an important call out. I think for so many of us, we feel like the current job that we're in is what we are. And so if it's not working for us, or like, we don't even like create that headspace to be able to open like our minds to explore different things. And you're right, like careers are not linear. And like, even I would never thought I would start a company. I thought just I'm like finance, product, business school, like, just keep moving up within companies. And here we are today. And I think it's just like similar to you, like, it's all through my experiences that led me to be here today. So thank you so much for sharing that. One of the common threads I see in your career is that you've often been the only woman in the room. And I know that's not easy, especially you are one of the very few women CEOs in Silicon Valley, which is such a great role model for other women. And that has, that's been like really positive, but there's also been some not so helpful ways. I think that's shown up for you. I remember seeing the San Francisco magazine article, or the cover, I think actually it was, where the magazine put your face on Mark Zuckerberg's body.
Yeah.
And I love your response to that, where you're something along the lines like, Zuckerberg is not good because he's male. And similarly, I'm not successful because I'm female. And I think I loved how you just totally owned that moment, flipped it, and just stood up and be like, hey, this is not okay. I think, so many women are like joining us are often feel lonely and are often like the only woman in the room. I know personally that's happened to me a lot, where I can feel really intimidating and very alone. So how have you managed that? What advice do you have for us? Like, how do you gain someone's respect really quickly? Especially what I think is really interesting is like, you've career switched so many times. So you're like, in a way, like always trying to build up your credibility. But even when you have that credibility still, at least from my own experience, even when I have that credibility, people are just like doubting me. And so how do you gain that respect? How do you own the room when you're the only woman in the room?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot to unpack there. The San Francisco, article that came out, I forget what year that was. It was a while ago, but I remember that moment. And we were really excited as a team about this opportunity to tell the TaskRabbit story in San Francisco magazine. And it was like many months leading up to the release of this magazine. And then literally they put it on newsstands. They didn't tell us what they were going to do or the artwork behind it. And it was shocking and it was infuriating. And it did not sit well. That was a very different time. If that had happened today, that magazine would be shut down. Like, there's just no way people would let that fly. At the time, I was infuriated. It was embarrassing. I'm like, I don't want to see my head on Mark Zuckerberg's body. Like, oh my God. I actually saw Mark years later and I brought him the magazine because he had never seen it. And he was like, this is so creepy. And it was just creepy. So, it's interesting because I think it's all of these little little sort of microaggressions or little things that happen that build up over time that can really influence how you show up in a work environment, in an office environment. I'll give you another example. When I was at IBM, I was working with, a team of engineers, mostly male, mostly, a little bit older. And I remember doing a code review one time with one of these engineers. And, I was saying like, oh, I just think, we could build the product this way and build the code this way. And his comment to me at the time was, wow, Leah, you're really ambitious. But he used the word ambition in a way that sounded bad. And I was super confused because I was like, oh, great, ambition, like that's a positive thing. I'm wearing my shirt today, ambitious, by the way.
Amazing.
It reminds me of that story. And it's just like, since when did having ambition, be a bad thing or be a bad characteristic, particularly for a young woman who's, building product and is an engineer. And so it's all these little things that add up and they can really weigh you down. I have felt weighed down time and time again in these different situations, these different scenarios. These are things that most CEOs don't have to deal with. Most founders don't have to deal with. They can just focus on building their businesses. And so, I think the key for me is just one, you just have to have like really thick skin. You've got to let things roll off your back. I did respond to the San Francisco Magazine article, right? And I wrote a letter to the editor and that was published. And so that was my way of handling it at the time. And so I think just having the confidence in yourself, it really comes down to really believing in yourself and believing what you can deliver and not letting all of those little microaggressions pile up, not listening to people who tell you you're too ambitious. And just realizing that you can have an impact in your own way, in a different way than any other person in the world can have. And just really owning that and walking into a room with that confidence and with that perspective.
I really love that. And and I think so, there's so many like good nuggets in there and kind of like, and I especially love how candid you are and kind of sharing your experiences. And you're right. Like if someone called me ambitious, I'd be like, thanks. But
so this is great.
Yeah, exactly. But sometimes it's like, okay, I use this compliment, but I don't think you are right now. So yeah, for sure. And how do you, in addition to having that thick skin and that confidence, when you're in those meetings, is there any kind of tricks that you use or strategies that you use to like command that attention so they're not discounting what you're saying?
I mean, it's a great question. I'm trying to think back to my time, particularly at IBM. I mean, when I founded my company, TaskRabbit, I built a team around me that was super supportive and really aligned with the mission and vision and values. I actually can think of from time to time, there was a time after I had I think it was my first baby, and someone on the team wanted me to do a ton of travel as part of a new product release. And I just thought it was a bad idea to like do this strategy of like traveling and the communications around it. And he kind of challenged me and he was like, is this because you just had a baby? You don't want to travel? And I was like, listen, we are going to have a conversation after this meeting is over about what you just said. And so again, like these things just happen. And it's tough to build up that credibility and confidence. When I was at IBM as a young engineer, it took time. It took time for me to build the confidence that I had as an engineer, as a, product leader. But I think when I really think about what made a difference, it was probably the people I surrounded myself with. It was having mentors, advisors, people on my team that I really enjoyed working with and I highly respected, both men and women. I mean, it was mostly men. And so I think that really helped. I think find great teams of people to work with, find great managers that are going to support you, find external mentors or advisors that can be your advocate. And I think that's what really helped me along the way.
Yeah, that's so true. That makes a ton of sense. Thank you for sharing that. And, one thing that is already so vivid through all of this, just like how authentically you show up. I mean, I have to say, I love the headband. It's super cute and it just feels like so fun and personal. And I would love to hear how you think about being authentic to yourself while, coming across as a strong leader? And I ask this because so many ascenders in the leadership program wonder, okay, how can I be direct and still be considered nice? How can I be a leader and not be mean? And I often ask them okay, why are those things actually in conflict? Or they talk about sharing interests at work without hurting their reputation. One of our members loves to bake. And so she would bring in treats to her office. And she's I don't want to eat it all. It's too much for me. But then she wondered if baking would hurt her reputation, if her colleagues would take her less seriously. And let's being honest, bias does exist. I think there can be ways that you can mitigate some of that bias. And so I'm curious, how have you navigated showing up in the workplace and showing up as a leader that's still super authentic while being really succeeding in that leadership role?
Well, thank you for the compliment on the headband. It's actually a portfolio company that I invested in called Autumn Adegbo. She's an amazing young Black fashion designer who just moved from New York to LA and is creating an amazing fashion brand. So we're excited to support her.
Awesome. I'm gonna check it out. Thanks.
Yes, please check it out. It's super, super fun. So she actually just announced a big round of funding yesterday that we participated in. So very excited for her. I remember when I worked at IBM, I would dress a certain way. I would dress down. I would not wear a lot of makeup. I would pull my hair back in a ponytail. And I always wore glasses when I was working on the computer. But I dressed a certain way, and I dressed differently than when I was out with my friends or I was out on the weekends, because I felt like I had to look a certain way to be accepted as an engineer, to build that credibility as an engineer, particularly in a room where it was, mostly men or all men. So I feel that I have felt that way. That is real. There is bias out there. I think over the years, because I've been able to build up my career, build up the credibility, and have the experience, you just get to a point where you're I don't really care what other people think, right? And you can kind of own who you are authentically. I think, it's easy to say your work speaks for itself. That's not always true. There is a lot of bias out there. I would just encourage people to, again, find teams and find companies that will support them as an authentic leader, as an authentic contributor. If they feel like they're not getting that support, then that's a good reason to move on. You can find great places to work and great teams to work with that allow you to be yourself and really own who you are. And so, ultimately I did end up leaving IBM. Ultimately, I don't think it was the right place for me to, stay forever, because I didn't feel like I could be, who I actually was and still have that same amount of credibility. Times are changing, things are shifting. And I think that's a good thing. But yeah, it's a real question. I really empathize with that question. And I felt that way myself.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. One more question about being a woman in the workplace. You invest a lot of time and energy into increasing opportunities in tech and venture for women. And also just, I think, underrepresented minorities in general, which I really admire. And that was actually a huge reason why I wanted to host you on this fireside chat, because our mission at Ascend is to elevate more women into leadership. And you're doing so much to help drive that change. I mean, you yourself are a role model for us, and then also for actually creating more opportunities, which I love. I would love to hear, I think so often I hear from people oh, I don't know what to do to drive it. I'm not in a leadership role. I'm not at the top. And I think, I personally don't think that's the right way to think about it. There's so much that we can do. Even if you're an individual contributor, you're a new manager, you can drive a lot of that change. So what tips do you have for us for how we can help create an inclusive environment, even if you don't have a huge leadership role?
Yeah, great question. And you're right. I really feel like going from engineering to founding my own company and now as an investor, being an investor allows me to really focus on supporting a new generation of underrepresented entrepreneurs, founders, groups. I'm also part of an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And this is a group of CEOs, a network of CEOs at a certain revenue threshold you can join. but I've been really active in YPO as well, just recruiting in underrepresented groups and women who qualify, because so often they're overlooked. They build incredible businesses, but they just don't have the same network to get plugged in and get connected. Why am I so passionate about this? I believe that ideas can come from anywhere. I grew up in a very tiny town. My parents were not entrepreneurs. I had no concept of, starting my own tech company in rural Massachusetts. But I found a TaskRabbit, and it's like, what other ideas are out there that should be utilized, right, by people all over the world? And I just think everyone has something to contribute, even if it's not found in a company, even if you're contributing to a team and to a product and to an organization. And so I think it is so important to have those different perspectives and diverse perspectives in building something that can be really impactful for people all around the world. Now, I think that being a part of a team allows you to really focus on being collaborative and finding other people on the team that you can support and advocate for. Even if you're not the manager or leader of that team, is there someone, on that team who you work with, who you think is really smart and has a lot to contribute and could make an impact in a positive way, but maybe, doesn't have as much confidence? Or, is there a way you can support that teammate or some other person in the organization? It can be lateral as well. So I just think there's so much opportunity out there, particularly as women, to really support, advocate, and help each other across all levels of an organization. And you can just kind of look around and see, who you can connect with and what you can do to help.
Yeah, I love that. And I see a question in the chat or in the Q&A around, building off that, like on the flip side, like how do you show up? How do you find a company where you can be your authentic self? Like I see it's from Sander actually. How do you evaluate if a company is a good place to be your authentic self and if the company would be a supportive environment for you? So like flipping it from like what we can do to create an inclusive environment, but how do we make sure we're in that space that supports us?
I think, during the interview process at TaskRabbit, we had a really transparent and maybe a little bit of a longer interview process because we wanted to get to know all of the candidates that came through, but we also wanted them to get to know the company, the mission, vision, values, and especially the culture. So at TaskRabbit, we had this culture book that we would give interview candidates, and we'd walk them through what our culture was like at TaskRabbit. And I think, culture is something that you can ask a lot about. Perhaps you can experience by meeting multiple members of a team. You can ask questions, about, the mission, vision, values of a company and kind of understand how their culture is formed and how it's driven. I think these are really, really important questions. You can also ask questions about, what a company is doing to support their individual contributors or people that are growing their careers throughout the company and organization. What opportunities are there for growth? What support is there for growth? There's great apps out there now for coaching, executive coaching, for new managers and helping them to manage their teams better. There's a lot of resources that companies can be tapping into. And I think if you ask the right questions, you can kind of understand a little bit more about a company's culture and get a sense of what it would be like to work there.
Yeah, it's all very practical tips for us to think about. Thank you for that. Switching gears a bit, I'd love to dig into a topic that I think many of us struggled with, especially in the past year. So many of us have about burnout. I think especially in the past year, we've had even more full plates given the pandemic and all the other things that have come with it. I know you've definitely dealt with burnout before. You've shared before that you had to be hospitalized when you were building TaskRabbit, yet you still have a really ambitious full plate. So I'm curious, like, how do you manage burnout? What advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this, particularly given hindsight of what I went through at TaskRabbit. Our last round of funding was the hardest one for me to raise. We needed to raise like $3 million to get profitable. We had already raised 50. Like it should have been pretty straightforward, but it wasn't. And for a multitude of reasons, I actually do understand now as an investor and the dynamics around that. But yeah, I was so stressed out. I ended up in the hospital with stress-induced colitis. I was on an IV pumped full of antibiotics for 5 days. Every day they thought they might have to do surgery and take out my colon. And so it was very scary. And I think that moment taught me a lot, particularly as I look back, as what we do as entrepreneurs. It was what we do as people, when we're really stressed out and we're trying to push forward. Now I realize as an investor, one thing we really promote at Fuel Capital is the idea of, we call it refueling, but really, thinking about how to build a company that is sustainable by really focusing in on what you need to be sustainable as a founder and as a CEO. And so, we hold an annual retreat called Refuel, where it's not a business focused retreat like a lot of venture capitalists put on. There's no, business strategy or business talk. We actually invite in meditation experts, sleep experts, physical coaches, and we walk our founders through 2 days of, meditation and reflection. And we've heard from our founders that it's like the best thing that they've done all year for themselves and their teams. And so I think it's just realizing sometimes it feels counterproductive to take the time for yourself to, carve out 10 minutes a day to meditate, to reflect, to just pause your mind. But I think that overall, what I realize now is that if I had done that as a CEO, my company would have been way better off. I would have been way better off. My team would have been better off. And so it's really important to just carve out that time, invest that time to not get burnt out. Because when you are burnt out, you end up in the hospital. You're not helping anyone, right? It's so counterproductive. So I see now how important that is. And that's something we work a lot with our founders on.
Yeah, I love that. I love that branding refuel. Super clever. So good. And what you're saying right now resonates so much with me. Actually, in fact, just last week, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed. And then I went to yoga class. And then in the middle of yoga class, I'm like, I'm going to go get breakfast. So it was like a Wednesday morning. And then I went and got breakfast. And I had like scrambled eggs and toast and a chai latte. And I felt like this was such a treat. And it just made me realize but I felt so re-energized after it. So I think what you're talking about, like just taking out whatever the 10 minutes or like the half an hour to go to a cafe and just like treat yourself to breakfast can actually have this like outsized impact in how you show up at work. Cause then I was able to come back and I was like so much more productive, more in the zone. And you're right. Like, cause if you end up being burnt out, like you don't help your team, you actually like lose time and you're not, So
you're not doing your best work either. You're
right.
not thinking clearly, you're not doing your best work.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of full plates, I would love to dig into how you incorporate personal and work life. So like personally, I want to be a mom soon. And something that's always in my mind is, how will I balance like being a great mom and a great leader? And I really loved when, we were like talking before this and Jamie and your team was sharing like, you're always a mommy and always a leader. And that, like, I loved that kind of branding and we should normalize that kind of blend. So would love to hear like, how do you approach it? How do you think about things? What are some tips that you have for us around it?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's something I've thought a lot about as well. It's something I've struggled with, that balance. I think over the years, what I've realized is you can have it all. You just can't have it all at the same time, right? Like there's only so many hours in a day. And I do always show up as a mommy. I do always show up as a leader. And I think I work really hard to actually kind of triage my schedule in a very tactical way to make those two things coexist together. They're totally intertwined. They are not separated. They're not compartmentalized. You may see a kid running here during this webinar. And that's all good. It makes me who I am as a leader. It gives me a different perspective to share. It gives me different experiences to share. And as an investor too, it gives me a different lens through which I can invest in teams and products and companies. So it's really, really important. Some tactical advice I have is when at TaskRabbit, I always color coded my calendar. And so I would always have time that was like internal team time as green. I would have, external investor meetings, as yellow. I would have, personal time as blue. I'd have family time as pink, something else. But anyways, it would allow me to glance quickly at a week or even a month and say, oh, wow, I was really overloaded with blue that week or green that week or investor meetings that week, or, oh, wow, I don't really feel like I got enough family or kid time that week. And I was never too hard on myself about feeling like I was off balanced day to day or even week to week. But I would always look back over the course of a month and say, do I feel good about the colors, I saw in my calendar that month? And if not, I would try to do better. I would try to do more, internal team time or more family time, whatever it was. I think, one of the silver linings of what we're all going through with the pandemic is that we have learned that working remotely is okay, can be done. And, I think that has further blended personal life with work life in a way that's become more acceptable. Maybe not everywhere, maybe not every company, but certainly a lot of places. And so I think that's helpful. I think that's a positive thing. I would always hear like, oh, I'm going to leave the office at 5:30 to have dinner with my kids. I'm going to put them to bed. And I'm going to get back online at 10 p.m. You know what? I want to be sleeping at 10 p.m. I'm sorry. I'm like not a night owl person. Like I need sleep. And so, so now it's a little more mixed of like, I'm not in the office till 5:30. I'm like at home and I'm doing emails in between school pickups and I'm, hearing investor presentation, all these different things. And it's a lot more mixed. It's a lot more constant. But I like that. And I think it actually helps to blend the two more and then again, be unapologetic about what you need. You do need to sleep. Okay. So, not getting back on email at 10 p.m. is okay in my book.
Yeah. I really love that. I think especially like the calendar hack is such a great visual way to cue. And then the biggest thing is like not being apologetic. It's, you need to do what you need to do for yourself and no one else should be able to judge around that. I think what you're sharing right now is like really resonating with people in the chat, like being always a mommy, always a leader. So thank you so much for sharing that. One question I saw come from the chat was related to this is, did you ever consider taking a step back when you had your baby?
I did not with the first baby. We were in the middle of launching the London market. It was our first market internationally. This was in 2013. I was really lucky enough, though, to have a fantastic team, a really great COO, in Stacy Brown-Philpott. Jamie was running marketing. I was able to take a shorter maternity leave, which was really nice. I had Amelia in October of that year, and I basically didn't go back into the office until January of the following year. And so because I had a really great team established, that was very helpful. 3 years later, when I had Ryan, my second, the company was at a very different stage, size, scale. And at that point, I was ready to transition my role. And so I transitioned myself to the board. I promoted Stacy to be CEO. And that was when I really started thinking about what I wanted to do next and, started looking into venture investing full time. And so it just so happened that we ended up selling TaskRabbit to IKEA. I guess it was almost a year after Ryan was born. And that's when I transitioned into investing full time as well. So it was kind of, at the end of that TaskRabbit journey that I did want to shift gears. Again, I love the earliest stages of company. I'm not so much the late stage kind of growth person. I just don't love it as much as I do building and figuring things out. So that was my journey.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's something that we don't ever get insights into. You just see someone's LinkedIn profile and you're like, okay, like they made a change, but not colors. And I think these are all the questions that are on so many of our minds as either we are parents or like thinking about being parents. So I really appreciate that. And, one last question for you is around like, we often celebrate successes, but we don't share our failures. Everyone's posting on LinkedIn or on Twitter and be like, this happened. But in reality, as both me and like, knowing how to deal with failure is critical to actually being successful. So I'd love to hear like, what's the failure that you've had and what have you learned from it?
I mean, there's so many things with TaskRabbit too. We could have done differently. I could have done differently. I think that our product became very stagnant and we could have changed it faster to be more of a mobile on-demand experience. I mentioned in the beginning, going on demand was non-trivial. In the early days of TaskRabbit, it was a pure marketplace model like eBay, where you post a job, you'd look at bids, you connect with someone. It wasn't very fast-paced. There's a lot of friction. And so shifting away from that into a on-demand booking platform, which it is now, took a lot of work, was really, really hard. But we should have done it sooner. It would have changed the business a lot sooner. And hindsight is 2020. I can look back now and say like, that was the right call. I wish we had done it sooner. The other thing I think I would have done sooner is leave IBM sooner and started a company faster as well. I just didn't have that exposure to what being an entrepreneur was. But I always had a lot of ideas and a lot of things, side projects that I was working on. And so I spent 8 years at IBM, which was a long time, and I probably could have left IBM a little bit sooner as well and used that experience to start a company before TaskRabbit even. So those are just a couple. Yeah.
I love those. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And actually like one actual last question for you, because I see a really great question in the Q&A that I think people would appreciate and it's getting a bunch of love. When looking for a mentor or advisor, what's the best way to ask for help when you don't have a lot to offer in return?
I think what mentors and advisors get excited about are supporting and helping people that they see potential in. And at least for me, I mean, if I see potential in someone and I really you feel their passion for what they're doing and what they're thinking about, I just want to help them. And so I think just really being authentic and sharing your passion is the most important thing. I don't think mentors and advisors necessarily are looking to gain something for themselves out of the relationship. A lot of times we can learn a lot from just mentoring and advising and hearing, someone's story who's up and coming. So, I'd say just be authentic, share your passion, and find people that are aligned with your values.
Great. Thank you for that. And I think you're right. So many mentors, just the joy and satisfaction of helping someone else. And then even thinking those problems the best way to learn is by teaching. So if you can like help someone else figure it out, that makes a ton of sense. And as someone is approaching to get a mentor, is there any kind of specific ways or kind of like examples that come to mind or like how to showcase that passion without feeling like I'm taking up too much of this person's time?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I think it's finding people that are going to have aligned values with you. So you don't necessarily feel like you're taking up their time. It's more like, you're sharing something with them that they already really care about. And maybe it's, a product, or maybe it's a nonprofit, or, who knows what it is. But I think just finding the right people to talk to, if you have that shared vision and shared values for what's possible, then I think everything else happens very organically.
Yeah, makes sense. This has been amazing. Thank you so much, Leah. I want, and at the end, we're all about action. And so I want all of you to like not to walk away from today's workshop, but like really reflecting on like something key that you're actually going to remember. So put in the chat, what's a key insight or thing you want to remember as we wrap up today's conversation? Maybe it's like Leah's always a mommy, always a leader. I know that resonates with a lot of you. Maybe it's around how to have your ideas taken seriously, how to help create inclusive environments for others, avoiding burnout, showing up authentically. So throw that in chat. What is a piece of advice or Leah's experience that you really want to make sure that you remember, I want to do it. The color coding. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely like one of my favorites too. And I think, I mean, Leah, like, I just really, really appreciate how your honesty around all of this. I think it's very clear that you genuinely want to help people. And so thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. We can learn so much from all of this. And yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining, just like kind of interacting with us in the chat. It was so good. Like your questions, all like your shares are so good. And, you know, if you found this experience, if you're like, you found this conversation really valuable and you want to be able to really develop these skills for yourself and be able to do it with an awesome community of women, then I'd love for you to come join us in the Sense Leadership Program. And so Erin will drop the link in the chat. If you are interested, you can apply now. And it's really, you know, a space for you to come, have a safe space to be able to learn the skills on how do you lead and influence, how do you rally stakeholders, so much of what we talked about today, and be able to do it while you get to connect with an awesome group of women. You know, people love it so much. They've often now created Ascend Slack channels internally at like Salesforce and Slack, and just to get to keep in touch. So if you're interested, join us, apply right now and mention that you are attended today's chat and we'll fast track it. And Leah, thank you again. This was seriously awesome. You're amazing. And it's such a special opportunity to get to talk to you.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Good, I'm glad. So we will send out the recording after this so you can rewatch it and go back, because I know there's so many good nuggets that Leah has shared. And take care, everyone. Stay well. Thank you so much for joining. Bye, everyone.